Rain fell hard on the metal roofs of the colony outpost. The streets were almost empty, except for the sound of water dripping into puddles and the distant hum of a cargo shuttle. Captain Elias was walking back to his cabin after a long day, his boots splashing in the shallow water. It was late, and most people had already locked their doors. But as he passed the back alley near the storage depot, something made him stop. Under the dim yellow light of a flickering street lamp, he saw movement. At first, he thought it was a stray animal searching for scraps. But then he saw a small figure crouched beside the trash bin. It was a girl, thin, soaked, and shivering. Her skin was pale silver, faintly glowing in the rain. Her hair clung to her face, wet and tangled, and her large eyes reflected the light like glass. Elias froze for a moment. She was not human. Her features were sharp, yet delicate. Her ears slightly pointed, and the markings on her cheeks shimmered faintly. She looked no older than 12. Her clothes were torn. Barely hanging on her small frame, she dug into the trash bin with trembling hands. Pulling out something wrapped in paper, she sniffed it and then bit into it quickly, as if afraid it would be taken away. Elias felt something twist inside him. He had seen alien traders, alien soldiers, even alien criminals before. But he had never seen a child alone in this district, and never one this desperate. He stepped closer, his boots echoing in the wet silence. The girl noticed him instantly. Her head jerked up, and her eyes widened with fear. She dropped the food and backed away, pressing herself against the wall. Her breathing was fast and shallow. Her hands were raised slightly as if she was ready to run. "It's all right," Elias said softly, keeping his voice calm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl didn't reply. Her eyes darted to the alley exit, then back to him. He could tell she was deciding whether to bolt or stay. Slowly, Elias reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small wrapped loaf of bread. He crouched down and placed it on the wet ground between them. Then he stepped back. The rain pattered against his shoulders. Cold and steady, the girl stared at the bread. Her lips trembled, and she glanced at him again. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, cautiously, she stepped forward and picked it up. Her hands shook as she held it. She took a small bite. Then another, faster this time. Her eyes closed briefly, as if the taste was the best thing she had felt in days. Elias stayed quiet. He knew that too many questions would scare her away. When she finished half the bread, she hesitated. Then she carefully wrapped the rest and tucked it under her clothes. Without a word, she turned and ran into the darkness. Her small figure disappeared into the rain, leaving only the sound of her footsteps fading away. Elias stood there for a while, watching the empty alley. Something about the way she clutched that bread stayed in his mind. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or why she was alone. But he knew he had seen real hunger and fear in her eyes. It wasn't the kind of hunger you got from missing a single meal. It was the hunger of someone who had been starving for a long time. When Elias finally returned to his cabin, he couldn't sleep. The image of the girl kept coming back to him. The rain outside continued through the night, and in the silence, between the thunder, he kept wondering where she had gone. He told himself she would find her way, that maybe she had family nearby, but deep down he knew that if she did, she wouldn't have been digging through trash. By morning, the rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet and quiet. Elias walked to the supply depot for his usual morning routine. He found himself glancing into the alley again. It was empty. He felt a strange sense of disappointment. He didn't know why, but part of him had hoped to see her there again. The day passed slowly. Work orders came in, cargo shipments were delayed, and the usual chatter filled the cum lines. But Elias barely paid attention. By the time night fell, he was restless. He walked the streets again, without much reason. When he reached the same alley, it was still empty. Only the soft hum of an air vent and the smell of damp metal remained. Elias turned to leave, but in that moment, a faint sound reached his ears, the sound of small footsteps splashing through a puddle. He turned back sharply, his eyes scanning the shadows, but there was nothing there. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the dark, she was watching him, and for reasons he didn't fully understand. He hoped she would come back. 3 nights had passed since Elias last saw the girl. He told himself she was probably gone, maybe found by her people or taken to another district. But in truth, he had kept an ear out for soft footsteps outside his cabin. He had even started leaving small pieces of bread wrapped in cloth on his windowsill, just in case she passed by. That evening, the colony was quieter than usual. A light mist floated in the air, glowing faintly under the street lamps. Elias sat inside his cabin, reading a maintenance report, when he heard it, a soft, hesitant knock at the door. Not the firm knock of a neighbor, nor the loud rap of patrol officers. It was gentle, almost shy, like someone unsure if they should even be there. Elias stood and opened the door slowly, and there she was, the same alien girl, standing in the mist. Her clothes were still torn, but her eyes looked a little brighter than before. She was not alone this time. Beside her stood a tall, slender alien woman. Her skin shared the same silver glow as the girl's, though hers was dimmer, marked with lines of fatigue. Her hair was long, tied loosely, and strands stuck to her damp cheeks. She was holding the girl's hand firmly, almost protectively. The girl looked up at Elias and whispered something in a language he didn't understand. The woman then stepped forward and spoke, her voice soft but carrying a deep weariness. "We have nowhere else to go," she said in halting human tongue. Elias glanced past them down the street. No one else was around, but he still felt the prickling sense of being watched. "You'd better come inside," Elias said quietly. The woman hesitated for a heartbeat, then guided the girl through the doorway. Elias shut the door quickly, locking it. The cabin was small, just a main room, a sleeping area, and a storage corner, but it was warm. The smell of soup lingered faintly from his earlier meal. The girl's eyes wandered around, curious yet cautious. Her bare feet left small wet prints on the wooden floor. The woman stayed standing near the door, as if ready to leave at any moment. "You fed my daughter," she said simply. Elias nodded. "She was starving," he replied. The woman's eyes lowered for a moment, and he could see the tension in her jaw. "I am Sira," she said at last, placing a hand gently on the girl's head. "This is Leary." Elias gave a small nod. "I'm Elias." There was a brief silence before Sira spoke again. "We need shelter." Just for the night, Elias knew the rules. The colony's governor had made it clear harboring alien refugees without clearance was a crime. If caught, the penalty could be severe. But looking at Leary, who was holding that same piece of cloth, bread he had given days ago, he couldn't say no. "You can stay," he said finally. Relief flickered in Sira's eyes, though her posture remained tense. He motioned to the small table. "Sit, warm yourselves," he said. Leary climbed onto the chair quietly, her legs swinging slightly. Elias poured some soup into a bowl and set it in front of her. She looked to her mother for permission before taking the spoon. Sira didn't eat, only watched her daughter as if making sure this moment was real. As Leary ate slowly, Elias noticed the faint marks on Sira's wrists. They looked like restraints, thin, dark lines against her pale skin. He didn't ask about them yet. Instead, he brought a blanket from the storage corner and handed it to Sira. "You'll both sleep here tonight," he said. Sira took the blanket, her fingers brushing his briefly. Her touch was cold, and he could feel a faint tremor in her hands. Outside, the mist thickened, curling around the street lamps like ghostly smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a patrol drone hummed. Sira's eyes darted toward the sound, and Elias saw a flicker of fear pass over her face. "You're running from someone?" he said quietly. Sira's lips parted slightly. But she said nothing. Instead, she turned to Leary and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Elias decided not to press her for now. When Leary finished her soup, she gave a small smile. It was the first time Elias had seen her smile, and it was faint, almost fragile. But it was there. He took the bowl from her and set it aside. Sierra guided her to the sleeping mat. Wrapping her in the blanket, the girl's eyes closed quickly. Exhaustion claiming her for a while, neither Elias nor Sarah spoke. The only sound was the steady breathing of the sleeping child. Finally, Sierra looked at him, her voice quiet but firm. "If they find us, they will take her away." Elias didn't ask who they were. He only nodded once. "Then they won't find you here," he said. For the first time, Sierra's shoulders eased just slightly. But outside, the faint hum of patrol drones still moved through the streets, and Elias knew this was only the beginning. The cabin was quiet. Only the soft sound of rain tapping against the roof and the slow breathing of the sleeping child filled the air. Elias sat at the small table, staring at the dim light of the lantern. Sierra was sitting on the floor beside Leary, one arm wrapped protectively around her. Her eyes were open, scanning the shadows like a soldier on watch. Hours passed, but Elias could not sleep. Something about the way Sierra kept looking at the window made him uneasy. Finally, he spoke, his voice low so as not to wake Leary. "You keep watching the street," he said. Sierra didn't look at him. "They will come," she whispered. Her words were not a guess. They were certain. Elias leaned forward. "Who will come?" he asked. She glanced at him then, her silver eyes catching the lantern light. "My own people," she said softly. "They are hunting us." That was not what Elias expected. He had thought maybe she was running from humans, colonial patrols, bounty hunters, smugglers, but her own people? Sierra looked back down at Leary, brushing her fingers across the girl's damp hair. "She was born in the territory of the warlord," Sierra continued. "He owns everything, their land, ships, even lives." Her voice tightened as she spoke. "When I tried to take her away, they called it theft." Elias frowned. "She's your daughter," he said. Sierra nodded slowly. "Yes, but to them? She is property." A chill ran through Elias. He had heard of such places, worlds where the weak were owned, where bloodlines were controlled like machines. But hearing it from Sierra's lips was different. The truth had weight, and if they find you? Elias asked. Sierra's eyes hardened. "They will take her back," she said, "and they will kill me." Silence settled between them, heavy and sharp, outside. A faint metallic hum drifted on the wind. Elias knew that sound a patrol drone. It was far for now, but getting closer. Sierra shifted, pulling the blanket higher around Leary. "You should not help us," she said quietly. "They will hurt you too." Elias looked at her steadily. "Too late for that," he replied. "I already gave her food for the first time." Sierra's lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile, but it was gone almost as soon as it appeared. Elias stood and moved toward the wall, pulling away. A small metal panel near the floor. Behind it was a narrow compartment, just big enough for a person to hide. "You can use this if they search the place," he said. Sierra's gaze lingered on the hidden space. Then she nodded once. The hours crawled by. The drone passed and faded into the distance. The rain stopped, leaving only the dripping sound from the eaves. Leary stirred in her sleep, whispering something in her own language. Sierra leaned close, whispering back softly. Elias caught only fragments, but the tone was tender, almost like a lullaby. When Leary settled again, Elias spoke. "You've been on the run a while, haven't you?" Sierra's eyes stayed on her daughter. 2 months, she said. "We had to hide on ships, walk through frozen fields, sleep under broken roofs." Her hand tightened slightly on Leary's. "She hasn't laughed since the day we fled." Elias didn't answer immediately, but in his mind, He remembered the way Leary had looked when eating that bread like it was her first real meal in days. He remembered the way her small shoulders had trembled in the rain. And something inside him hardened. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said. Sierra looked at him sharply. "That is dangerous," she warned. Elias shrugged. "Everything worth doing is," he replied. They sat in silence again for a while. The lantern flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch like reaching hands across the walls. Then, suddenly, a sound come a soft scrape of boots on wet ground outside. Sierra's head snapped toward the window. Elias moved quickly, putting a finger to his lips. He crossed to the door and pressed his ear against it. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, nothing moved. Then came a faint rustle, like someone brushing against the wall outside. Sierra was already guiding Leary toward the hidden compartment. Elias reached for the small rifle he kept behind the chair, but after a tense minute, the sound faded away into the night. Elias exhaled slowly. Sierra eased Leary back onto the mat, but her eyes never left the window. "They're close," she murmured. Her voice held no fear, only cold certainty. Elias knew then that this was not just a matter of shelter for one night. If he chose to help them, it would be for the long road ahead. He looked at the small sleeping girl again, her face peaceful despite the danger, and he knew his decision was already made. The morning came cold and gray. A thin layer of mist clung to the ground, curling around the buildings like smoke. Elias stepped outside to fetch water from the pump, trying to act as if everything was normal. But the quiet felt wrong. It was the kind of quiet that came before trouble from the far end of the street. The sound of engines broke the stillness. Dark shapes appeared through the mist. 3 patrol ships. They were alien craft, sleek and sharp, their hulls glinting faintly in the pale light. Elias's jaw tightened. They were here, just as Sierra had warned. He turned and went back inside. Sierra was already standing, holding Leary close. Her eyes met his, and she didn't need to ask what he had seen. "They are here for us," she said quietly. Elias nodded once. "Get into the hiding space," he told her. Sierra didn't argue. She moved quickly, guiding Leary toward the small compartment under the floor. Leary's small hands clung to her mother's arm, her eyes wide with fear. Elias pulled open the panel and helped them inside. Sierra crouched down, wrapping her arms around Leary in the cramped space. Before he closed the panel, she looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't let them take her." Elias met her gaze. "They won't," he promised. The knock came just seconds after he replaced the panel. It was loud, heavy, the kind of knock meant to break down doors if ignored. Elias opened it slowly, keeping his face calm. 3 alien soldiers stood there, armored and armed. The leader stepped forward, his eyes scanning Elias from head to toe. "We are searching for escaped property," the soldier said in a cold voice. "Have you seen a silver-skinned female and a child?" Elias shook his head. "No," he said simply. "They were reported near this district." The soldier pressed. Elias shrugged. "I mind my own business," he replied. The leader's eyes narrowed. "We will search anyway." Elias stepped aside, forcing his voice to remain casual. "Go ahead," he said. The soldiers entered, their boots thudding on the floorboards. They moved with methodical precision, opening cabinets, pulling aside curtains, checking every corner. Elias leaned against the wall, hiding the tension in his body. Every second felt like an hour. One soldier moved toward the storage corner, right above where Sierra and Leary were. Hiding Elias's pulse quickened. If they stepped too hard, they might hear the hollow echo of the space beneath. The soldier bent down, running a scanner along the floor. A faint beep sounded. Elias moved quickly, stepping forward. "You scanning for rats?" he said with a dry tone. "They've been a problem in this building." The soldier straightened, giving him a sharp look. But before he could question further, the leader called out, "Nothing here. Move to the next house." The soldier hesitated, then turned away. They all filed out without another word. Elias closed the door slowly, listening to the fading sound of their boots and engines. When the street was silent again, he went to the panel and opened it. Sierra and Leary emerged, both pale but unhurt. Leary's hands were shaking. She clung to Elias's arm without thinking. He rested a hand gently on her shoulder. "They're gone," he said. But Sierra shook her head. "They will come back," she said quietly. "They never give up." Elias knew she was right. The patrol had not believed him completely. They would return, maybe in greater numbers. Maybe at night, and each time, the risk would grow. He sat down at the table, rubbing a hand over his face. "We can't stay here forever," he said. Sierra looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I know," she said softly, "but I have nowhere else to go." Elias thought for a long moment. The safe zones were far from here, and getting there meant crossing guarded territory. But the longer they stayed, the greater the danger. He looked at Leary, who was now sitting quietly on the mat, staring. At the door, she had that same hollow look as the night he first saw her by the trash bin. He made his decision. "I'll get you out of this district," he said. Sierra's eyes widened slightly. "That is?" "Not simple," she said. Elias gave a small, humorless smile. "Nothing worth doing ever is outside." The mist was clearing, but the sense of danger remained thick in the air. Elias knew that from this point on, they would have to move carefully. One wrong step, and all three of them would be caught. But the choice was made. He was in this now, and there was no turning back. The day after the patrol search, the cabin felt smaller than ever. Elias stayed alert, every creak of the floor and every noise outside making his hand twitch toward the rifle. Sierra kept Leary close, rarely letting her wander more than a few steps away. The tension was like a heavy cloud that refused to move. Late in the evening, Elias sat by the table, cleaning the parts of his weapon. Sierra stood by the window, the lantern light tracing the silver lines on her skin. "You mean to take us out of this district," she said, without turning. Elias looked up. "That's the plan," he replied. She faced him then, her expression serious. "If you do this, you will not be able to return to your old life," she warned. "They will mark you as an enemy." Elias set the rifle down and met her gaze. "I already made my choice when I hid you," he said. Sierra studied him for a moment, as if searching for any hint of hesitation. Then she sat across from him, her voice lower now. "There is something you must know before we leave." Her hands rested on the table, fingers laced together. "Before I fled, I was part of the fleet," she said. "Not a soldier, but high rank in the command network." Elias frowned. "You were military." Sierra nodded. "I had access to War Council transmissions, fleet routes, and even the warlord's private orders." She glanced at Leary, who was quietly playing with a small carved wooden figure Elias had given her. "When I discovered his plan to take the next border system by force, I knew it would mean thousands dead," she continued. "I refused to help, and that made me a traitor." Elias leaned back. "So you ran?" "Yes," Sierra said, "but not alone. He would never let me go without taking what he wanted most." Her eyes softened as she looked at Leary. "She is not just my daughter, Elias," she said. "She is proof." Elias tilted his head. "Proof of what?" Sierra's voice was almost a whisper now. "Proof that his power can be broken." Elias didn't understand at first. Then it hit him. If she had been in the warlord's circle and still managed to escape with Leary, it would show others that he was not untouchable, that his control was not perfect, that he could be defied. "So if you get to safety, you could rally others," Elias said slowly. Sierra nodded. "But the warlord knows this," she said. That is why he will chase. Used to the edge of the galaxy if needed, Elias rubbed his temples. All right. Let's say I get you to the safe zone, he said. What happens then? Sierra's eyes locked on his. Then I make sure your people and mine know what you risked, she said. You will have allies you never imagined. He studied her for a long moment. It was a dangerous bargain. Help her now, and maybe gain powerful friends in the future, but fail, and they would all die. Elias's mind flickered to the patrol ships, the soldiers, the cold eyes of their leader. It would be a hunt from the moment they stepped outside the district. Sierra's voice cut into his thoughts. I cannot offer you safety, but I can offer you purpose, she said. Elias gave a faint, tired smile. I already have one, he replied, glancing at Leary. She's sitting right there, for the first time since they met. Sierra's eyes softened in a way that wasn't guarded. You are a strange human, Elias, she said quietly. Most would have sold us for a reward. Most aren't me, he said. They began to plan. Sierra knew of old maintenance tunnels under the cargo docks, passages the patrol rarely checked. If they could reach them at night, they might slip past the scanners. From there, they could try to find a freighter captain willing to take them toward the safe zone. It would mean bribes, moving in shadows, and possibly fighting their way out. Leary listened quietly as they spoke, her small eyes darting between them. At one point, she reached out and touched Elias's hand. He looked at her, and she said something in her own language. Sierra translated softly. She says, "Thank you for not leaving us." Elias's chest tightened at that. He covered her small hand with his own. Not planning to, he said. Leary smiled faintly, then leaned against her mother. The night wore on as they mapped out the route and prepared what little supplies they had. By the time the lantern burned low, the plan was set. They would leave the next night. When the patrol was busiest near the south gates, it was a risk, but so was breathing in this district. Elias checked his rifle one last time, loaded the spare magazines, and strapped the knife to his belt. Sierra packed food and water, wrapping them in a worn cloth. Leary clutched the small wooden figure like it was a talisman. When the final preparations were done, Elias sat back and looked at the two of them. In that moment, he realized something. He was no longer just helping strangers. He was part of their fight now. Night fell heavy over the colony. The streets emptied earlier than usual. As if the people could feel something dangerous in the air, Elias waited by the door, his pack strapped tight and rifles slung across his shoulder. Sierra stood beside him, holding Leary's small hand. The girl clutched her wooden figure, her eyes wide and alert. "We go now," Elias said in a low voice. Sierra gave a single nod. The three of them stepped out into the cool darkness. Their footsteps muffled by the damp ground, they stayed close to the shadows, moving between buildings and keeping far from the main road. Above them, faint patrol lights scanned the streets like watchful eyes. Elias led them through narrow alleys. He knew from his years in the district the air smelled of rust and damp stone from time to time. He raised his hand to signal them to stop. Once, they pressed against a wall as a patrol drone floated past, its sensors sweeping the street in a slow, searching arc. Leary held her breath, her small fingers tightening around Sierra's. When the drone passed, they moved again. After 20 tense minutes, they reached the edge of the industrial quarter. Ahead lay the entrance to the old maintenance tunnels. The grate was rusted and half hidden behind stacks of unused crates. Elias crouched and worked the lock with a small tool. The metal groaned softly, and the grate swung open. Inside, he whispered. Sierra climbed in first, guiding Leary down into the dark passage. Elias followed, pulling the grate shut behind them. The tunnel was damp and smelled faintly of oil. Pipes ran along the walls, dripping water into shallow puddles. Their footsteps echoed softly. The air was cold, but it felt safer than the open streets above. Syrah moved ahead, leading them through the maze-like tunnels. She clearly knew the way, counting the turns under her breath. "These connect to the cargo docks," she murmured. "Old Paths Patrol scanners do not reach here." Elias was glad for that, but he kept his rifle ready anyway. They had been walking for nearly an hour when the sound came, faint at first. Then, louder, the metallic clank of boots on the tunnel floor. Elias froze. Syrah turned, her eyes sharp. "They found the tunnels," she whispered. Elias motioned for them to move faster. The passage ahead narrowed, forcing them into single file. Behind them, the footsteps grew closer, joined by the hum of handheld scanners. Shadows danced along the tunnel walls as faint light from their pursuers flickered around the bends. Leary stumbled, but Elias caught her, lifting her for a few steps until she found her balance again. Syrah glanced back, her face tense but steady. "There is a side vent ahead," she said. They hurried. The sound of pursuit pushing them faster when they reached the vent. Syrah dropped to her knees and began loosening the bolts. Elias covered. Her rifle aimed down the tunnel. The light of the pursuers' lanterns glinted off the wet floor just around the corner. "Hurry," Elias urged. The last bolt came free, and Syrah pulled the grate aside. She pushed Leary through first, then followed. Elias was last, pulling the grate back into place before slipping into the narrow vent. The vent was barely wide enough for crawling. Their clothes caught on jagged edges, and the air was thick and stale. They moved in silence except for the scraping of knees and elbows against the metal. At last, a faint glow appeared ahead. They reached the exit, a small hatch, opening too. The underside of the docks. Elias eased the hatch open and peered out. The dock above was quiet, dimly lit by overhead lamps. Massive cargo containers loomed like silent towers. A single old freighter sat at the far end, its loading ramp down. "That's our way out," Elias whispered. They slipped from the hatch and stayed low, moving from shadow to shadow. Every step felt longer than it should, the open space of the docks making them feel exposed. Halfway across, a voice called out in the alien tongue. Elias turned sharply, spotting two dock workers staring at them from behind a crate. Syrah stepped forward. Quickly, speaking in rapid words Elias didn't understand. The workers looked uncertain, glanced at each other, then walked away without raising the alarm. "That was close," Elias muttered. "They are not loyal to the warlord," Syrah replied softly. Finally, they reached the ramp of the freighter. An older human captain stood at the top, smoking a thin roll of leaf. He squinted down at Elias. "You bringing trouble aboard, Elias?" he asked. Elias didn't lie. "Maybe," he said. The captain stared for a moment, then shrugged. "Get in, ship leaves in 10. Relief washed over Elias, but it didn't last. From the far side of the docks came the echo of boots, many boots bounding in unison. "They found us," Syrah hissed. Elias turned to the captain. "Get ready to lift off now." They ran up the ramp. The sound of shouts and weapons charging filling the air behind them as the ramp began to rise. Elias saw the first soldiers enter the dock, their armor glinting under the lights. A bolt of plasma struck the side of the freighter, sending sparks flying. Leary cried out, and Syrah pulled her close. Elias raised his rifle and fired a short burst, forcing the soldiers to take cover. The ramp locked into place, and the freighter's engines roared to life. The ship shook as it lifted from the dock through the small viewport. Elias watched the patrol shrink away into the distance, but he knew this wasn't over, not yet. The freighter shuddered as it broke free from the planet's pull. Elias gripped the railing beside the viewport, watching the dark curve of the colony shrink into the distance. The stars stretched across the void like endless silver dust. For the first time in days, there were no patrol ships in sight. The captain glanced back at him with a smirk. "Safe for now," he said. Elias knew the important words were "for now." Sarah sat on a bench near the rear of the cabin. Holding Leary close, the girl was half asleep. Her head resting on her mother's shoulder, her small wooden figure was still clutched in her hand. Elias moved over and sat across from them. Sarah's eyes met his, and for the first time since they had met, there was no guarded suspicion in them, only quiet gratitude. "How far is the safe zone?" Elias asked the captain, still at the controls. Answered without turning. 2 days, if the old engines hold up. Sarah exhaled slowly. 2 days more than I thought we had, she murmured. Those 2 days passed in a strange mix of tension and calm. They stayed in the lower deck, away from prying eyes, when the freighter stopped for fuel. Elias kept watch, his rifle never far from reach. Sarah spent most of the time with Leary, speaking to her in their language, telling her stories Elias could not understand, but could feel in their tone. The girl smiled more now, though she still woke from sleep sometimes with a start. Each time, Sarah was there to hold her until she calmed. On the second night, Elias sat beside the viewport. Staring at the stars, Sarah joined him, her voice low. "When we reach the safe zone, it will not be the end," she said. "The warlord will know we are alive, and he will send shadows to follow us." Elias gave a faint smile. "I'm getting used to shadows," he replied. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You are not just a man who gave bread to a hungry child," she said. "You are part of this now." The next morning, the freighter captain called down from the cockpit, "Safe zone ahead." They moved to the front. And through the viewport, Elias saw it, a vast station floating in the dark, its outer rings spinning slowly. Lights dotted its surface like a city in the stars. Ships of many kinds drifted in and out of its docking bays. The captain guided them toward a smaller port on the outer ring. As the freighter docked, Elias felt the tension in his chest ease. The airlock opened with a hiss, and they stepped into a wide hall lined with traders, security officers, and civilians from a dozen species. No one here looked twice at Sarah and Leary for the first time. They could walk without fear of being recognized or seized. A representative from the Safe Zones Refugee Council met them. Sarah spoke with her briefly, explaining their escape. The woman listened, then nodded and handed Sarah a small data chip. "This will give you temporary housing and protection," she said. Sarah accepted it, but then turned to Elias. "He is the reason we are here," she told the woman. The council representative looked at him for a moment and then gave a short bow. "You are welcome here, human," she said. They followed her to a small set of living quarters, simple but warm. The walls were clean. The air smelled faintly of fresh linen, and there was a bed big enough for both Sarah and Leary. Leary ran her hands over the blankets, her eyes wide in wonder. Then she turned and hugged Elias tightly. Her voice was soft but clear. "You?" "Home," she said, in broken human speech. Elias felt something tighten in his chest. He knelt so he was at her height. "You're safe now," he said. She nodded and smiled, then went to her mother. Curling up on the bed, Sarah stood for a moment, watching her daughter. Then she faced Elias. "I owe you more than I can repay," she said. Elias shook his head. "You don't owe me anything," he replied. But Sarah's voice was firm. "My people will know your name," she said, "and when the time comes, you will have our strength at your side." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the station faint in the background. Outside the small window, the stars shimmered against the dark. Elias knew he could leave now, turn to the life he had before. But deep inside, he also knew that life no longer fit him. He had stepped into something bigger, something that mattered. When he finally turned to leave, Leary's small voice called out, "Stay," she said simply. Elias hesitated, then looked at Sarah. Her eyes held no command, only an unspoken question. He smiled faintly. "All right," he said. For now, he would stay. And somewhere far away, the warlord might still be searching, but here, in this small room on a station of strangers, a new home had been made, and Elias knew he would defend it, no matter what came next.